This is Spiro Skentzos, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
This week's episode is once again sponsored by Pilar Alessandra, the author of the Coffee Break Screenwriter and On the Page podcast. And she is again offering a 10% discount off one of her interactive online classes. This one is Writing TV, and it runs 4 Saturdays from July 11th to August 1st. In the first 3 classes, Pilar helps you create a series pitch, world, cast, and pilot. Class 4 is all about the business, and here Carol Kirshner takes over, discussing staffing, selling, and obtaining representation. The class is open to TV writers at all levels and is taught through Zoom in real time. To get your 10% off, use the coupon code ONTHEPAGE10 at checkout. If you want to help me to continue to bring these weekly episodes to you, please consider becoming a patron or sponsor for as little as 25 cents per episode. And there are reward levels for different amounts. Visit tvwriterpodcast.com/support for details. You're going to love the interview. Let's roll. Well, I am so excited to have somebody that people who go to Comic-Con and WonderCon and things like that must have seen Spiro Skentzos before. He's a writer-producer whose credits include Grimm and Arrow, and he's also known for moderating a lot of writing panels at all the conventions. How you doing, Spiro?
I'm good, thanks. It's good to see you. I know it's our first time sitting down since all the times that I've met you. Seeing you.
Yeah, it's been a thing that we just look forward to. The shot of you and my daughter as Supergirl. It's like we have one from every single convention.
Yeah, I have that one too. I think it's great. I think it's so great you guys go out together. I love how the con is such like a family friendly, all ages, all people, all types type of situation.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about the cons a little later on. But you mentioned that this time is a little different. I assume you're talking about the virus. I've been opening most of my interviews just talking about how is the virus affecting you.
Yeah. I know it's affecting everyone, and there's so many people who are suffering and sick and dying from it right now. So I feel pretty fortunate to be holed up, here in Los Angeles area and doing okay. I've been working from home the past several months. I have a pilot that I sold to a studio. I've been doing some rewriting on that before we take it out. So
nice.
I feel like nothing's changed for me except I'm just eating more carbohydrates and chocolate.
Yeah. No, I hear that. There's quite a few writers who were already in development. It's like nothing changed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's rewind quite a ways. I think
sure.
It's going to be nice to. I've interviewed lately a lot of EP and showrunner level writers, and I know you had asked me, well, what do I have to offer? I think it's great to hear from sort of the other side as one who's trying to break in and trying to get further ahead, and is perhaps able to share a little more freshly about the breaking in times.
In the trenches and whatnot.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. Where did you go to college? What did you study? And when did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
So I went to the University of Michigan. I actually got an art history degree because I was just like a big fan of art growing up. That wasn't something that was encouraged in my home. So I took the opportunity to explore that in college. I have an art history degree with minors in film and biology because I thought I wanted to make documentaries about the arts and the sciences because I was all Renaissance kid. But then I came out here and I fell into TV and I was like, wow, you can make an entire, piece of art of TV in 7 days and get it on the air. And I just thought that was so cool. And I love the storytelling aspect of it and the collaborative aspect. And it just kind of stuck with me. So that's how I got into TV.
And you started out in comedy. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was an assistant on the George Lopez show, assistant executive producer for a couple of seasons at the end of the run. I got to pitch stories. So I wrote like three freelance stories there. And that was very exciting. At the time, I was like, everyone's like, oh, you're the EP's assistant, so it's cool. But now you walk into the room and they're like, all right, what stories do you have to pitch us? Like it was, like down to business. Like we like you and all, but like, what are you pitching? And it was a lot of pressure, for like a babe in the woods, the way I was, to go in there and pitch. And I ended up selling, 3 different stories, writing 3 different stories for the show, the final season and a half. So it was a really fun way to get in, and it was a nice way to kind of break in to actually getting the script done because you already knew all the writers in the room and it was very, familiar and family-like.
Very cool. And so at that point, was that when you got representation?
It's funny you should. I saw the representation question that you had sent me earlier, and I was like, "Oh, this is funny." I have an interesting history with representatives.
Oh, yeah, talk about it.
I was I was at George Lopez. These CAA agents wanted to hit pocket me, and hit pocketing is something that they do when they actually don't want to rep you, but they think that you might be, someone to watch or whatever. So, they will like, oh, we'll unofficially rep you. We'll send you out on a couple things. And they didn't send me out.
Rep.
Yes. They didn't send me out on anything, but what they were doing is waiting to see if I got staffed on the show the next season, which I did not do. And then I never heard from them again. So I think it's, that was one of the first times realizing that like not everyone gets you or understands your voice, and you have to really be aware of the value of your voice and who gets you and who you kind of, become partners with, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me, we've got the Santa Ana winds are driving me crazy.
And so, speaking about finding your voice, you mentioned about art history. You mentioned about, it sounds like maybe comic books were somewhere in there.
Yeah,
in genre in general, what you ended up writing. So tell me about how you made that shift.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, well, I guess it's not so ironic if you think about it. But growing up, I was surrounded. I grew up in a multi-ethnic family, speaking Spanish and Greek and English, and I was surrounded by a lot of magic realism and a lot of Greek, classic mythology. I loved comic books and Star Wars, and I used to write scripts for my Star Wars characters to defend themselves against my sister's giant menacing Barbie dolls, because they're like this and the Star Wars characters like this. And I would shoot that, and I would show that at family dinners on Sunday. And how my parents didn't know I wanted to be a writer then. But so I look back on it, it's ironic that it's fitting that I would end up in hour-long drama writing in the genre world. After I was on George Lopez writing, the freelances, I co-created and co-wrote an animated web series called Chadam, which is on YouTube now. And that was really fun because I got to play with all the genre and world building that I liked, but I really wanted to get into like real, like character-driven, layered material. So I started writing hour samples. So I was writing half-hour samples, and I was writing hour samples, and I had this other agent who was at Paradigm, and he's still there. And I was like, I want to write an hour sample. It's like, no, you're a comedy guy. You got to write comedy. I'm like, but I want to write this sample. It's like, no, don't write that. And I was like, no, that doesn't feel right. Like, I should be able to write what I want. And so I ended up writing this Grey's Anatomy spec. And I sent it to him. And a week went by, and he called, and I was like, oh, cool, he's going to give me notes. He's like, so, I don't really think this is working out, and I didn't read your script, but like, it's just not working out. And so, but it gets even better. And he's like, so, I think it's best that we just like end our relationship. But if any shows or offers come your way, let me know, and I'll close them for you.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh my goodness.
And at the time, I'm sure I was like, oh, that's so thoughtful of him. But like, it's not at all. Again, it's someone who's not seeing you for who you are and the work that you do. So I was like, well, the hell with this. Like, I took that script and I submitted it to some writing programs, and I got into the first year of NBC's Writers on the Verge program with that script.
Nice.
And I was like, yes, I thought that was a real good, like, I'll show you type of thing. So I got into that program. And then when we got out, they're like, congratulations, you're our first graduates, but it's the 2008 writer's strike. So there's no jobs. So, I was working as an assistant at NBC at the time. And as I'm working, in the offices, I can look out the window and I could see like this line of protesting for, the Writers Guild. I was like, God, I want to be in that line, but I also need to pay my rent. It's very frustrating. So from there, like NBC, like it took a couple years, but NBC really pushed to get me on staff because I, was one of their assistants. I was in the writers program, and Grimm came along, and I had an agent at the time who actually did help get me on that show with their efforts. But,
and so were you staffed as I know with a lot of the writers programs, they'll pay half your salary. Was that the situation, or had that expired?
No, it was, I think I was brought in as a, quote unquote diversity hire, and
Mm.
they do pay for part of your salary the first few years. So, I had the interview on Grimm. I love the show. I love the Grimm fairy tales growing up, and I have all the unabridged versions and stuff like that. So
Mm.
I was really excited to work on that show, and I went in like the pitch. They really liked me. They didn't have the money for me. Then money was being found for me. It was all like multiple people working at multiple levels to make that happen.
Yeah.
That's how hard it is
Wow.
to get staffed your first job. It was like
Mm.
NBC wanted me on the show. The EPs wanted me on the show. There wasn't enough money. I guess they just spent their last, money on another diverse hire. So
Mm.
I got on the show, and I was on the show for 2 seasons, and I had a blast, writing character stuff and genre stuff together. It's like my wheelhouse. I really like that.
Mm. Very cool. Very cool. So this was your first real drama staff experience. And
Yeah.
what were you feeling at that point? Were you feeling like, I've got it made, or what was
I
your
was
sentiment?
terrified that I would let everyone down.
Uh-huh.
I think that's just like how I was brought up. But also to get on the show, I had this. Had become friends with the very high level, prominent executive producer the past few years, and she knew the guys who created the show.
Mm.
And I was like, "Hey, would you put a word in for me?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'll tell them that you're awesome." And so that also helped. So I was like, I didn't want to let her down. I didn't want to let the show down. I didn't want to let Rose and Verge down. I didn't want to let my family down. All that. So and like I just really wanted to like come up with fun ideas and just like push, push, push. And so that's what I did for 2 seasons on the show. It was really
Mm.
fun.
And speaking about fun ideas and push, 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 after that you started developing. Tell me about that time.
Yeah, I had an idea. Like I'm a big classic civilization dork, and like
Mm.
I've read a lot of that. Part of art history was that I took was archaeology, and I came up with an idea that takes place at the end of the kind of Roman emperor, where Rome is now in Constantinople, and so I built these two warring families into it. One is pagan, one is Christian, and they're the patriarchs of which are wheat merchants, because wheat was like the oil of the time, right?
Mm.
And it's basically a Dallas. It's like Dallas and sandals, but just more sex and violence. And it was the last hurrah for Christianity when a new emperor came to the throne, and he wanted to go back to pagan times. So like it was
Mm.
the last hurrah for pagan. Sorry. So it was a time where it was like this final push for pagan culture by this emperor who took the throne for 18 years. And I was like, well, that's just a really fascinating thing. And it was kind of the same time going on. I think like Obama had just been elected, and it was
Mm.
like, who is this imposter president that people, some segments were screaming about. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And, drawing parallels from that. So I sold that to a Canadian company, and we had set that up as an international co-pro to take it out and sell it to the marketplace. So
Mm.
we came pretty close at this one cable company, and then we didn't get it. So I did that, and then I wrote a feature for Mar Vista, and then I sold another pilot,
Mm-hmm.
which then I had to put on hold because then I got on Arrow. So
Oh, wow.
that period between the two shows was a lot of development with like capital D development.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I think the fact that you sold stuff is already pretty nice. I know there's tons of development that happens where you don't sell what you're
Mhm.
writing.
That's most of the development. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to just take a quick break to hear from sponsors, and then we'll talk about Arrow and a bunch of other stuff. DrivingFootage.com provides 4K 9-angle driving plates for film and television. Over 14,000 clips are available for locations all around Southern California, with more areas coming soon. A fully equipped camera car with height-adjustable rig is available for custom shoots and second-unit photography. Visit DrivingFootage.com for details. AVGearGuide.com provides computer and gear rentals serving the LA area, including laptops with Final Draft, as low as $9 a day with long booking rates available. They also scan photos, documents, video and audio tapes, and film reels to digital, so you can easily share with your friends and family. Mention the name of the TV Writer Podcast and you will get 10% off your order. Visit avgearguide.com for details. Full disclosure, I do own both of these companies. By supporting them, you help me bring new in-person video interviews to you. And we're back. And I would love to hear about somebody who loved the genre being on Arrow. Well, how did you land the gig, and what writing samples got you in the door? And what was it like to just be writing on a comic book series like that?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, so I'd had friends who were on Arrow, like climbing the ranks, and I knew people on the show, and they tried to like recommend me prior seasons when it just didn't work out for, staffing needs. And this particular season, they needed someone who was a comic book geek like I am, because they had just lost theirs, I guess. And so
was that Keto?
no, that she had gone on. She's a sweetheart, and she had gone on to Legends of Tomorrow, but they had just lost another writer too, who I guess who had left the show, and he was also a big comic person. So they were really kind of down on their comic people, low on that. So, like I came in with comic book knowledge. They knew who I was. They read 2 samples of mine, I believe. One was this family drama, which I now have set up at MGM. It's about illegal immigration and a secret second family, and very non-genre, but it's very it's family, and so much everything we write is family. Like Arrow was a family, and I think that's what we tune in to see in shows is the family coming together, the family having a fight, the family getting back together, despite if it's your real family, your work family, or your superhero family. So I came in with that, and then I spent a season on the show. It was one of the best seasons of the show too that I was on. I was really excited about that. I got to write an episode with Deathstroke, and he's one of my favorite
nice
DC villains. So I was super excited about that. So it was fun.
Very, very cool. And you mentioned you sold this other thing. What have you been working on since Arrow?
Oh, so I sold a Supernatural pilot right before Arrow, which I put on hold for Arrow, and then afterwards I went out with a studio attached who bought it, and that little mini studio, it caved, fell apart just as we were getting to go out, so it never really got out. So there's that, and then last year I set up this piece that I mentioned to get into Arrow. This piece that I showed them, I set that up at a studio, and we're doing attachments now and trying to get that out. Very cool. I'm really about that. And then in the meantime, it's I've got a book I'm working on. I've got a comic book I'm trying to get out, and I've got 2 pitches ready to go once this coronavirus ends.
Yeah, very, very cool. Well, one of the things I'm adding to a lot of my podcasts is talking about mentorship. Who would you say your mentors have been over the years?
Yeah, it's funny. I like that question, and I thought that it was a good one, because you don't get as far if you don't have a mentor, and mentorship is so important. And I think originally when I started out, and certainly when I was in Half Hour, I didn't have that mentorship, and I didn't have the person on the show saying, yes, you need to be on our show. We need to support you to get on that show. I didn't have that, but I had an amazing writing teacher who's been a mentor of mine. The mentor from Writers on the Verge, she's still my mentor and a good friend. Jen is great, and also I'm thinking of Erika Kennair, who is amazing. She created the program that first year, and she's awesome, and she's still someone who I just look up to and talk to and think is great. Jen is amazing. She's such a great script doctor, and she just sees story and character, and you can't say enough great things about her. Karen Horn at NBC was a huge fan, and part of the reason, one of the main reasons why I got onto Grimm, actually. And on Grimm, I ended up working with a bunch of fun writers. One of them really, took me under his wing, one of the high level EPs. He's one of my best friends to this day. And it's just nice because when you've got someone who can not just champion you to help you help you get in and get read and get a job, but also that supports you when you're on the downswing and things are so to have that group of friends, it's not mentorship in the strict sense of the word, as in I'm your mentor and I tell you what to do, but having friends and people who support you and want to see you succeed. And I feel like I have a group of friends, in the industry who I do that with, and I will call each other and how are you doing? What's going on? Are you doing all right? How can I help? What are you working on? just to, verbal supporting and mentorship like that, I think is really important.
Mm.
So I've been really fortunate in that sense.
Yeah, very cool. And are there people that you're mentoring as well?
Yeah, I actually am a official mentor in a couple of programs that are around, and also, I mentor newer writers to the Guild just by befriending them and then checking in on them and seeing what they need, helping them write their essays for. We have a portal on the Writers Guild website to
Mm.
submit shows, and that's a completely different writing brain trait to have, quality to have, and I've helped a lot of them craft those letters. That way they're short and succinct and right to the point, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to be too long and reading people's scripts and giving notes. I've also been teaching at Script Anatomy
Oh,
with
nice.
Tanya Bhattacharya, and she's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. She's a great writer. And so I've just been doing that this past spring. And that's
Very
another
cool.
form of mentorship. You make some great
Mm.
bonds with some people who are really talented, and you want to see them succeed, and their voices are interesting.
Hmm. Very cool. And speaking about mentoring, I guess moderating panels would kind of fall into that umbrella. How did you get started moderating? And I mean, this is something you do very consistently now. What was it made you want to do about it, and what have you learned along the way?
Well, it's interesting. The reason I guess I started doing it was because I remember writing to Comic Con. This was actually for WonderCon, so,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago, and I was like, hey, you know what? You could use, since WonderCon was much more like handmade and bare bones and get in there and do it yourself type of thing. I was like, you really need a panel about TV writing, and I would love to do that because I've got experience doing that, and I love Comic Con and WonderCon,
Mm.
and they're like, I got an email from them saying your panel's been approved, and I was like, what? Yeah, I didn't I didn't think they would go for it, but they did. And
Uh-huh.
that first time I did it was at WonderCon, one of the last years it was up in San Francisco, and it's the panel that like I would have killed for that panel when I was on the
Mm.
outside. Like when I was on the outside looking in, and like how do I get started and who do I need to talk to and what do I need to write and all that. So I feel like it's really like it's a nice thing to do. It's something I should be doing. I feel like people should be, and who are in position to do so should be doing things like this.
Mm.
So, I think it's really beneficial to people. I've actually met some friends through it, in addition to you, some other people who I've made friends with. But just to give people who are, starting off, nascent writers, struggling writers, any of that, to give them a new point of view to like kind of jumpstart their writing,
Mm.
somehow to support them or, push them to like get going, because life's short and there are no guarantees. So if it's something you want to do, you need to pursue it, because that way you can't you want to be like in the old folks home in the rocking chair and look back and be like, I did it, I tried it, it didn't work, but at least I tried it and I know. Or
Mm.
like, I wish I would have, like, which person do you want to be is kind of my MO for life. And that's
Mm.
why I'm always trying new things and trying to do the things that I want to do, especially when it comes to writing,
Yeah.
and being persistent and persevering, because everyone will tell you no. But I think it's important that you tell yourself yes, and that you get out there and you do it. And I feel like the Comic Con panel is part of that.
Has there anything that has surprised you about the experience?
I guess just like, I don't know if this is what you're talking about. Like, I was surprised when people ask, what characters do you write for on the show?
Mm.
Because like you write for all the characters, and I just thought that was like, that's an inkling there. That's someone
Yeah.
who is on the outside, who wants to be on the inside, doesn't know how, and
Mm.
like they need to know this, like that type of stuff. But just like the various voices and people who are out there who are working day jobs, just like I
Mm.
was, and struggling to get writing done, which is really hard after you work all day, especially if you work in production. You don't want to come home after a 12-hour day and write.
Mm.
Or if you've got two kids or you're a single mom and you've got an apartment and you're sharing with two or three other people, how do you find the space and the time to do that? But you have to do it, even if it's just like a sentence a day, whatever it
Mm.
is you have time for, you need to make the time to do that, because that's how one, every letter is a word and every word is a sentence type of thing.
Mm. Well, it seems like you were writing a lot of scripts early on. What were the sort of resources that you went to? Are there any particular books that you found helpful, courses that you found helpful?
There weren't a lot of books, like 10, 12 years ago when I was getting started, it was a lot of trial by error. It was a lot of trying to get people who are ahead of me in the
Hmm.
poll, and the ranks to read me, to give me advice. Now there are so many. There are websites, there are writing programs like Script Anatomy, Writers on the Verge, any of these writing programs you can get into, and some that you pay for, like Script Anatomy, which is
Hmm.
amazing source. That's kind of where I think a lot of it's being done now, because you can read a book, but a book's not the same as someone who has been writing in the industry for 5 years, 10 years, who is current on what is the latest trends in the writer's room, you know?
Hmm.
So I think there are some good books out there that I actually can't think of the names of right now because I have to look at my library. Um, but there's a lot of, you can get scripts now online. Like you couldn't get scripts 10 years ago,
Hmm.
really. So that's a great value in itself. It's like finding scripts off the internet, the internet, and reading them and looking at the act breaks and going through and be like, why is this scene here? Why is this character talk like this? Why is the act break here? To get an idea of how to write a script.
Hmm. What would you say is the toughest part about being a TV writer?
Oh, I think the toughest part is just like staying in there, staying in the game and being positive. It's like they say, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Hmm.
It could be, like a bum deal, like when you're not staffed and you see all of your friends who you came up with are staffed and they're getting
Hmm.
promoted and you're not staffed. And, like so much of it is out of your control. Like you can control how good your writing is and you can control people, like not
Hmm.
control, but you can control whether or not you go out and meet people.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of it's out of control. Like right after Grimm ended that season, I had 3 showrunner meetings. None of the shows went.
Hmm.
And kidding me. And that's when I did develop the period piece and whatnot. And then um, after Arrow, where I was repped, they didn't get me a single meeting because they weren't doing their jobs. Because I know a lot of people love their agents, and there are good agents out there. I've not had that experience,
Hmm.
so I didn't get a single meeting. And then the very next season, new manager, everything. 5 showrunner meetings. I've never had 5 showrunner meetings in a season before. I was
Wow.
about to get an offer on one of the shows. Show didn't go. So like I can't control that.
Hmm.
You need to know not to be so hard on yourself about certain things. But what you
Hmm.
should do is, if things make you mad because you didn't get into that writers program or you didn't get staff, like turn around, put it all on the paper, put your anger on the page. Like, who is this character that's angry and why, and what's their wound, and what are they trying to achieve, and who's keeping them from it? Just turn it right into a story.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
did that with I put like all of my into a script, and that's the one that I get meetings off of all the time, and it's the one that got sold to the studio that we're setting up. It's like if you really write from a strong point of view, strong character type of stuff, that's the stuff people respond to. You may
Hmm.
just get a general out of it. Oh, we really love you, but we don't have anything for you right now. But like that's huge. Like to get a general off of your work is huge,
Yeah.
and that shouldn't be underestimated or belittled because it's a big deal. Getting on staff is winning the lottery. Like you can be on staff on a show that goes 5 years, 15 years.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean you're a genius. It means that you got lucky. I mean, you may,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they're obviously like you're doing something right, but like there's a lot of politics involved as well. And for the people who know how to play that long game, it really works out. And if you're lucky, it really works out. You can be a great writer and be on a show that goes down after 13 episodes, and then you get on
Hmm.
another show and that one goes down. Like people have bad luck, and there's
Yeah.
no guarantee. So you just have to keep writing.
Hmm. Yeah. Very, very wise. I talked to all different writers, and you would be amazed. There's every example you can think of. I talked to one writer who was an assistant for 10 years. He actually early in that time he got 2 freelance scripts on this was Lois and Clark, and he got an agent, and then went another 8 or 9 years as an assistant. And now he's a showrunner, been a showrunner for a while. Then there's showrunners
Yeah,
who, after they finish their show, can't get a show. Like,
they're good people and they're good
yeah,
writers. You just don't know, man. Like everyone wants to be a writer. Everyone thinks they can do it. A lot of people can't, but like a lot of people can. but there are not enough jobs. It's like musical chairs, you know?
Mm. And how do you see peak TV changing slash affecting this?
I don't know. There are more shows, but there are shorter runs because a lot of it's streaming and there are smaller rooms. So like it's easy to say, oh, there's lots of shows out there. Go get a job. But not if they're smaller rooms and all these mini rooms that they're doing, and even the small rooms, they all staff from the top down. So
Mm.
you'll get a staff of EP, 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 and they'll be like, oh, it's all executive producers and it's all guys and there are no women on the show. We better hire a woman as a staff writer, which is completely unfair because there
Mm.
should be women at the top already and people
Yeah.
of color at the top already and LGBT folks and disabled folks. And that's part of the conversation that's going on now is like there's the upper level, which is traditionally straight white cis dudes, and then there's the free or cheap staff writer, which is often the entry level for women, people of color, you know, various, you know,
Diversity
underrepresented
hires.
groups.
Mm.
Yeah, but they're often brought in for the season because they're free or cheap, and then they're kicked out, and then another person is brought in to take their place. So you get this glut of mid lower level underrepresented writers in the system who are
Mm.
not moving up the ranks. So you still don't get those ranks filled with a lot of inclusion, and it's still always at the staff level, which
Mm.
isn't helping anyone really. And you know that's I think a big problem. There are a lot of it's hard to be a mid-level writer because most people only want you if you have a producer title and above, or
Mm.
if you're a cheap and free staff writer. So it's like the shrinking that middle class kind of a parallel to America. The shrinking middle class, it's everyone at the top and everyone at the bottom, and barely anyone in the middle who gets to rise up.
And I also
Um,
hear about diversity hires not getting bumped. Like
yeah,
there's something where I guess
yeah.
they don't have to because they're not considered a full. That it's not considered a full year if you're a diversity hire. Something
Oh,
weird
it
I've heard.
depends on the. I think it depends on the show. I think for ABC, their fellowship, I believe, at least it used to be, was you're ABC fellow the first year.
Hmm.
So you're not even a staff writer, you're just a fellow on the show. And then the second year you would be the staff writer.
Yeah,
But
and
there are
so
shows where
if they're circulating and you're only a fellow, you won't actually
yep,
get that first credit.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, there are a lot of shows that try to make writers repeat staff level for a second year, even in a row. I've seen happen.
Mm.
I think it's outrageous. Um, you know, and it's just like this rush to the top. Like, granted, you're paying for people who are at the top who've got a lot of experience
Mm.
and they can turn over a script and they know how to produce an episode and all that. But there are a lot of people in the middle who've been staff writer enough that they know how to do that as well. So I think it's going to continue to be an issue of how are lower mid-level writers going to get work and going to raise up the ranks if they keep getting kicked out after their initial staff writer season.
Mm.
So
So
that's definitely a problem.
So would you say that's the kind of thing that is fueling all your development? Like what's next for you? Do you see yourself trying to get a show where you can be the showrunner of the show, or what are you
Sure.
moving towards?
Well, I love working on staffs. I love being in a room with fun people working on great ideas, and it's just really exciting. I just had a meeting for a new procedural show that's
Hmm.
yet to be picked up, so we'll see if that goes. I had a meeting for an open writing assignment for a big producer. We'll see if that goes. Um, and then, you know, other than that, it's development. Like I'm developing because I have ideas and I want to try to make them happen. And since I'm
Mm.
not working right now, like what else is there to do besides develop?
Yeah.
So I think that's important is to always be writing, even, you know, like write a new pilot, write a short story, you know, just keep being active in writing. And that's what I'm doing now. While I wait to see what's going to happen. I mean, no one knows what's happening with this crazy coronavirus year
Mm.
because pilots haven't been shot. I talked to an executive friend of mine. He's like the head of Current at one of the networks. And I was like, hey, I really love this pilot of yours. You know, what's going on? Can I get, you know, on a list or whatever? And he's like, I have no idea. Like, I'm the head of, you know, like the current programs, and I have no idea. We haven't shot all of our pilots yet. We don't know if we're going to like do direct to series, wait for a second. And this was a couple weeks ago. I think that's kind of becoming a little more solidified now. It looks like the shows that a lot of networks are interested in picking up, they're asking for a second script from the showrunner
Mm.
before they decide. I don't think anything's going to get shot pilot wise this year. I think it's all going to be can we rush into production in August before the next wave of coronavirus hits?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So a lot of writing will be happening in the next few months.
You can write. You can write on yourself. You don't need to, be around a lot of people. And if you're doing a writer's room, you can do a Zoom room, which isn't as fun or as creative as an in-person room. But, you can get a bunch of scripts written, but they need to be produced at some point, or else why keep generating scripts? I have a friend on a show. They got an early pickup. They wrote 6 episodes, and then they were all told to go home, and they'll finish writing the rest once they go into production on these first 6.
Wow.
It's for a network show, because we can't keep paying you to write scripts. We don't know when we're going to make them.
Wow.
So it's kind of crazy.
I just had a thought. It's like, when there's a big blackout, how 9 months later there's a ton of babies.
Yes.
I think this coronavirus time, next year, you're going to see all kinds of crazy creative pilots circulating.
I hope so. I hope so. That'd be awesome.
That's a good transition to sort of tips for greener writers, people who are writing in this time. What mistakes do you see people making on the page, in interviews, career strategy, in the room? You've been on a couple staffs now. I'm sure you have some things that you've seen.
Yes, hopefully things I haven't done, but I've seen. And it's funny because that's what we do in the Intro to TV pilot that I do at WonderCon now, and as well as Comic-Con, is kind of do the nuts and bolts, get quite Q&A on that. And it's essentially like, you should know what a script is like. You should know how they're formatted. If you're writing a Big Bang Theory, don't turn in a 60-page script. Those scripts are standard, 45-page, double-spaced sitcom. It's traditional sitcom. If you're, writing a hour-long pilot, know that if the show is cable or network, are there act breaks for commercials? And even if there aren't, you should be building in your head act breaks to keep escalating the stakes throughout this, throughout the script. I was a reader for Writers on the Verge for 2 years, and I do other reading of scripts. And even though a typo won't necessarily make or break your script, like if you got 1 or 2, but it's a great script, I've seen scripts come in where like, did you just type all the wrong keys in this script? Like what? So you don't do that. Like, proof your script, have someone else proof it. And I think getting started in the writer's room, the best piece of advice ever given to me when I got started was on Grimm, EP on the show. I was like, am I pitching enough? And she's like, you make 1/10 of what we make. If you are pitching like 1/10 of what we pitch, you're doing fine. It's like so I was like, all right, so every 10 pitches I should have a pitch, and it should be a good one type of thing. Also like knowing when to be quiet and listen, like don't interrupt people. I've seen that a lot. Over eager or often like insecure or nervous people will interrupt and just say a thought that's in their head. You don't have to pitch on every single thing, but if you don't pitch a lot, your pitches should be really great and on point to this, the story.
Cool.
So those are a couple like beginner mistakes.
And what might you say to your younger self based on what you know now?
Oh God, so many things. I would say like do more sooner. Like, it keeps getting more challenging every year because there's so many more opportunities to get staff, which means there are also opportunities to not get staff, and there are more people out there. I was just like, just don't be so nervous and just write more and explore more. I think that's a problem growing up, is you're so focused on one thing, you don't see the other things around you, and you have to live a life in order to write interesting stories. You can do research on what instruments a paramedic uses, but you can't do research on the actual story behind a paramedic. Like if you have a lived experience, that really brings a lot more to a story. And I think that's important for writers to remember.
Very cool. We're just getting to the end of our time here. Is there any sort of final thoughts that you might give people who are wanting to break in, people maybe are having some troubles in their careers?
It's like, do you want to do it? Like, is this something you want to do, and how much do you want to do this? Like, are you willing to like do this and keep trying and banging your head to get in for 20 years? because like I was an assistant for 150 years before I got an opportunity. So it's about perseverance, and it's about knowing your voice, and it's about not letting people say no to you, who you are, and to your voice. So if you want to write, give it a try. Maybe it's not right for you, and you don't want to be a writer after all. That's cool. Like, you tried. But if you really want to do it, like if you feel like deep down inside that you are a writer, you are a storyteller, if you are always writing, if you're always looking at stories and trying to think of new stories, and you're reading books, and just the narrative form fascinates you and drives you, then you should write, and you should give that a try, and you should try to carve out time in your life, despite what other obstacles and time things that you have to do, to write and give it a try. And I would apply to any of the writing programs to try to get in, just to see if what happens. Like, most of them are free, if not cheap.
Very
but
cool.
Don't give up if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. That's a great place to end up. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time, and best of luck to you in all your projects. I hope that very soon you'll be that showrunner who's hiring other people.
It was great to see you. I appreciate you calling me in after seeing you all the time at the panels. That's really nice.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Spiro.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe on all of the places you can find this podcast: YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and also make sure to rate the podcast and submit your comments. Please do follow me on Twitter. @GrayJones is my handle. And also visit tvwriterpodcast.com/support for details on how you can become a patron of this podcast for as little as 25 cents per episode. Well, that's it for this week. I appreciate you joining me. See you next time. Bye-bye.